The divorce papers felt colder than the marble floors of the penthouse he was so proud of. Damien Voss, my husband of 5 years, slid them across the glass coffee table with the same detached precision he used to close multi-million-dollar real estate deals. "It's over, Amelia," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Outside, the lights of San Francisco glittered like 1,000 mocking eyes. I felt the tiny, fluttering life inside me, a secret I had planned to share tonight over a celebratory dinner. Now that secret felt like a shield, the only thing holding my fracturing world together. The silence in the penthouse was a physical entity. It pressed in on Amelia, thick and suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the city far below. Just an hour ago, this silence had been full of anticipation. She'd arranged a small bouquet of white freesias, his favorite, on the dining table, the caterer's exquisite meal warming in the oven. She had rehearsed the words 100 times, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach that was not yet a bump, but a promise. "Damien, we're going to be a family." Now the catered food was forgotten, its aroma a sickly sweet ghost of a future that had just been executed. Damien stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the sprawling, indifferent city. He hadn't looked at her, not really, since he'd walked in and dropped his briefcase with a thud that seemed to echo the finality in his heart. "I don't understand," Amelia whispered, the words catching in her throat. Her voice was a fragile thing in the vast, minimalist space he had designed. Every piece of furniture, every polished surface, was a testament to his taste, his ambition. She had simply been another beautiful acquisition, placed perfectly to complement the decor. "It's very simple," Damien said, finally turning. His face, usually a handsome mask of charismatic confidence, was hard, impatient. He was a man who hated inefficiency, and to him, this conversation was an emotional inefficiency he needed to resolve. "We've grown apart. Our priorities are different. I want something else." Something else. The phrase hung in the air, clinical and cruel. He made it sound like he was trading in a luxury car for a newer model. And in a way, he was. He gestured dismissively toward the divorce papers. "My lawyers have been very generous. The settlement will ensure you can maintain your lifestyle." His lifestyle, not hers. Her lifestyle, before him, had been quiet libraries, worn paperbacks, and volunteer work at the local animal shelter. She had folded her life neatly into his, believing that was the shape of love. He saw her as simple, uncomplicated, a serene backdrop for his tumultuous ambition. He had no idea the world she'd willingly left behind was infinitely larger and more complex than his could ever be. "There's someone else, isn't there?" The question was a cliché, but the pain was achingly original. He didn't flinch. "Her name is Isabella Cortez. You may have seen her. She's the new face of the Versailles campaign." Amelia's mind flashed to the billboards plastered all over the city. A stunning woman with liquid brown eyes and a pout that promised a world of excitement Damien had clearly found irresistible. The betrayal was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She had been so blind, so trusting. The late nights he'd claimed were for work, the sudden business trips, the scent of a different perfume on his suit jacket she'd convinced herself was from a colleague. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her hand instinctively went to her stomach. The secret, the tiny, persistent flutter. It was the only thing that was truly hers in this cold glass cage. "Damien," she began, her voice shaking but finding a sliver of strength. "There's something you need to know." He held up a hand, cutting her off. "Whatever it is, Amelia, it won't change anything. My mind is made up. Isabella understands me. She understands my world, the pressures, the drive. She thrives on it." He took a step closer, his tone softening into a condescending sort of pity. "You were always too gentle for this life. You deserve a quiet life, a garden, books. I'm doing you a favor, really." Rage, cold and pure, pierced through her shock. A favor? He was tearing her life apart and calling it a kindness. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words dropped into the silence, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not joy, not concern, annoyance. It was the look he got when a construction project was delayed, when a permit was denied. It was the look of a man encountering an obstacle. He was silent for a long moment, calculating. She could almost see the gears turning in his brilliant, ruthless mind. He was assessing liability, running the numbers on this new, unexpected variable. Is it mine or mine? He asked. The question was a scalpel designed to wound, to shift blame, to create doubt. Amelia felt the floor drop out from under her. Of all the cruelties, this was the most profound. He was trying to sever not just their past, but their future, the last biological link that would tie them together. You know it is, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that surprised even herself. The gentle Amelia he thought he knew was receding, and something older, something forged in a world of far greater power, was beginning to surface. Damien shrugged, the gesture a final devastating dismissal. It doesn't matter. It changes nothing about the divorce. We can have the lawyers work out the arrangements for it separately. Paternity test, child support, all of it. Just another clause in the contract. He saw their child as a clause, a line item in the dissolution of their marriage. In that moment, the love she'd clung to, the memories she'd cherished, all of it turned to ash. He hadn't just broken her heart, he had revealed that he never truly knew it at all. He had no idea who she was, where she came from, or what she was capable of. He thought he was the shark, the apex predator, and she was just a guppy in his magnificent aquarium. He was about to learn that she was the ocean. Sign the papers, Amelia, he said, his voice returning to that brisk, businesslike tone. It's better to be clean about it. She looked down at the documents, at the clinical black ink that spelled out the end of her world as she knew it. Then she looked back at him, her eyes clear now, the tears having dried up, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. No, she said, his brow furrowed. What? I said no, she repeated, pushing the papers back across the table. You don't get to dictate the terms of my surrender, Damien. Not anymore. You want a war? You'll get one. But you should know. You've been fighting it on my territory all along. He laughed, a short, humorless bark. Don't be dramatic, Amelia. You have nothing. Your name, your home, your accounts, it's all tied to me. She gave him a small, sad smile. That's what you think, she said softly, turning her back on him and walking towards the bedroom, her steps steady and sure. That's your first mistake. The penthouse, once a symbol of her life with Damien, now felt like enemy territory. Amelia moved through it with a deliberate calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging within her. She didn't pack the designer clothes Damien had bought her, the jewels he'd gifted her after closing a big deal, or the art he'd curated for their walls. She packed a small, worn leather suitcase with the things that were truly hers. A handful of faded novels, a framed photo of her laughing with a silver-haired woman, a soft gray sweater that had been her mother's, and her laptop. The rest was just set dressing for a life that had been a lie. She left her keys on the glass coffee table, right next to the unsigned divorce papers. As she closed the heavy door behind her, the soft click echoed with a finality that was both terrifying and liberating. She didn't take the elevator down to the garage where a luxury sedan waited for her. Instead, she took a service elevator to a side exit, melting into the foggy San Francisco night like a ghost. She didn't call a black car or a taxi. She walked 2 blocks, her face obscured by a simple scarf, and descended into the city's public transit system. The rattling of the train and the anonymous faces of the commuters were a strange comfort. Here she wasn't Mrs. Voss, the socialite wife of a real estate tycoon. She was just a woman on a train, heading somewhere else. Her destination wasn't a 5-star hotel or a friend's lavish apartment. It was a small, unassuming walk-up in the Mission District, a place she had kept secret from Damien for years. It was her sanctuary, her one link to the life she'd paused to be with him. The apartment was simple. A small living area with a comfortable, slightly lumpy sofa, a kitchenette, and a bedroom with a view of a brick wall. But every item inside was hers. The shelves were crammed with books on coding, quantum physics, and history. The art on the walls wasn't by famous artists, but framed schematics and patent diagrams. This was her real home. The air smelled of old paper and brewing tea, not the sterile, floral-scented air pumped through the penthouse. Here she could breathe. Sinking into the lumpy sofa, Amelia finally allowed the tremors to rack her body. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest. She cried for the man she thought she had married, for the future she had so carefully painted in her mind, and for the child who would now be born into a battlefield. Flashbacks played behind her closed eyes. Their first meeting at a charity gala. He had been dazzling, focused, a force of nature who saw her across the room and pursued her with single-minded intensity. He'd been charmed by what he called her serene intelligence. She'd been captivated by his ambition, his seeming adoration. He'd loved that she wasn't like the other women in his circle, who talked only of fashion and gossip. He didn't know that her disinterest stemmed from the fact that her world was one of logic, algorithms, and innovation that made his real estate deals look like child's play. She had told him her family was in tech, a vague description he'd accepted without question, assuming it meant a comfortable but unremarkable middle-class background. He was the self-made man. He preferred that she have no competing dynasty. Amelia Sterling, an orphan raised by her grandmother, sounded perfect. It was a half-truth. She was an orphan, but her last name wasn't Sterling. That was her mother's maiden name. Her real name was Amelia Ethelgard, and the family in tech was Ethelgard Technologies, one of the largest and most influential privately held tech empires in the world. A soft knock on the door startled her. Only one person knew about this place. "Mia," a voice called out. "It's me." She opened the door to her older brother, Leo Ethelgard. He took one look at her tear-streaked face, the suitcase on the floor, and his expression hardened. He was a gentler version of their grandmother, less sharp edges, but with the same core of steel. "He did it then," Leo said, his voice low. He stepped inside and enveloped her in a hug. "Grandmother's jet is on standby. We can be back in Geneva by morning." Amelia shook her head, pulling away. "No, not yet. I'm not running back with my tail between my legs, Leo. Not this time." "This isn't running," he argued gently. "It's coming home." "This is home," she said, gesturing to the small apartment. "The place where I could be myself. Damien never saw this. He never saw me." She sank back onto the sofa. "He wants to pay me off, Leo. He thinks he can just write a check and I'll disappear. He told me I have nothing without him." Leo's jaw tightened. "The arrogance of that man is astounding. He has no idea, does he? He has no idea that the seed money for his very first major project, the one that launched him, was funneled through 3 shell corporations from a Geneva bank account controlled by grandmother." Amelia looked up, shocked. "She told you?" "She told me after you married him. It was a wedding present, a test. She wanted to see what he would build. But she also made sure that if he ever hurt you, she held the foundational deeds to his entire empire." The revelation was staggering. Her grandmother, Genevieve Ethelgard, a woman who operated with the strategic foresight of a chess grandmaster, had never trusted Damien. She had built a safety net for Amelia, woven into the very fabric of her husband's success. Damien's self-made narrative, the very core of his identity, was a fiction underwritten by the family he disdained. A new feeling began to displace the grief. It was a slow-burning anger, but it was also a spark of power. Damien hadn't just betrayed her. He had built his kingdom on her family's land, and then tried to evict her from it. "He knows I'm pregnant," she said, her voice flat. "He suggested a paternity test and called the baby a clause in a contract." The color drained from Leo's face. The Ethelgard family was fiercely private and intensely protective. An heir was not a clause. It was a continuation of a legacy. This insult was not just to Amelia, but to all of them. "Okay," Leo said, his voice deadly quiet. "The gloves are off. What do you want to do, Mia? And don't say nothing. That's not an option anymore." Amelia looked at the framed pattern diagram on her wall, a complex algorithm for predictive data analysis she'd co-authored under a pseudonym. She thought of the world she had given up, a world of intellectual challenges, of building things that mattered. She had chosen love, and it had been a poor investment. Now it was time to return to the family business. "I don't want to ruin him, Leo. Not completely. That's not who I am," she said, taking a deep breath. "But I want him to understand. I want him to feel what it's like to have the foundation of his world crumble. I want him to know that he was the one with nothing, and I was the one who gave him everything." She picked up her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and familiarity that had been dormant for too long. "Call grandmother. Tell her I'm back, and tell her legal team to get ready. Damien Voss is about to learn about due diligence." Damien Voss felt untouchable. He stood on the balcony of his new sanctuary, a lavish borrowed apartment overlooking Central Park in New York. Isabella was draped over a chaise lounge behind him, scrolling through her phone, the picture of effortless glamour. San Francisco was a memory, a chapter he had decisively closed. Amelia's tear-streaked face was a minor, unpleasant detail in an otherwise perfect corporate takeover of his own life. "The board meeting was a triumph, darling," he said, turning to Isabella with a triumphant smile. "The Blackwood Tower project is officially greenlit. The financing came through this morning. It's going to be the tallest residential building in the city. My legacy." Isabella looked up, her expression momentarily distracted from a stream of social media notifications. "That's wonderful, Dee. We should celebrate. There's a new private club opening in Soho. Everyone will be there." Her enthusiasm was for the party, the status, the reflection of his success she could wear like a new diamond bracelet. It was exactly what he wanted. There was no quiet questioning, no talk of feelings or moral quandaries. Isabella was a mirror, reflecting his own ambition back at him, polished and beautiful. With her on his arm, he wasn't just a successful man, he was an icon, a brand. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO, Mark. Damien answered, his tone expansive. "Mark, tell me more good news." "We might have a small fire to put out," Mark said, his voice tight with an anxiety that immediately pricked Damien's good mood. "It's about the financing for Blackwood. The lead investor, a European consortium called Argentum Capital, has invoked a review clause. They're putting a temporary hold on the funds pending a material change in circumstance audit." Damien's grip on his phone tightened. "What the hell does that mean? What material change? Our valuation has never been higher." "They're being vague, citing leadership stability concerns." "It's bizarre, Damien. These guys have been rock solid for years. They were practically silent partners. Now, out of nowhere, they're acting like we're a volatile startup." "It's a shakedown," Damien spat, pacing the balcony. "They smell blood in the water after the acquisition and think they can squeeze us for a better position. Get our legal team on it. Threaten to sue them for breach. I will not have my legacy project held hostage." "Already on it," Mark said. "But Damien, be careful. These Argentum people are ghosts. All we know is that their money is old, clean, and has deep roots. Poking them might not be wise." Damien hung up, his jaw clenched. He refused to let this derail him. It was a minor hiccup, a test of his resolve. He would crush it, just like he crushed every other obstacle. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in a steel and glass mansion overlooking Lake Geneva, a very different kind of meeting was taking place. Amelia sat at a long, holographic conference table, a cup of herbal tea warming her hands. Across from her sat her grandmother, Genevieve Ethelgard, the matriarch of the Ethelgard Empire. She was a woman in her late 70s with eyes that missed nothing and a mind that moved like a quantum computer. "Argentum Capital has put a hold on the funds," Genevieve said, her voice calm and measured. She was looking at a series of complex financial charts projected in the air between them. As expected, Mr. Voss is responding with aggression. He thinks it's a power play. Amelia nodded. "It is, just not his." "Leo informed me of your situation," Genevieve continued, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly as she looked at her granddaughter. "I am sorry for your pain, my child. I will admit, I never trusted him. His ambition was a hunger that could never be filled. A man like that always ends up eating whatever is closest to him." "You funded him," Amelia said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact she was still processing. "You gave him the money that made him. I invested in an asset that was attached to my most valuable treasure." "You," Genevieve corrected gently. "It was an insurance policy. I hoped I would never have to cash it in. But now it seems the premium is due." The head of Ethelgard's legal division, a sharp-eyed woman named Sophia, shimmered into existence as a holographic presence at the end of the table. "Genevieve, Amelia, the initial probes are complete. Voss Developments is leveraged more heavily than we thought. His recent acquisitions were aggressive, funded by debt secured against his existing properties. The linchpin for all that debt, the collateral that made the banks comfortable, was the consistent, silent backing of Argentum Capital." Amelia leaned forward, her mind so long occupied with domestic concerns, now snapping back into the familiar patterns of strategic analysis. "So if Argentum pulls out, it's not just the Blackwood Tower that's at risk. It's a domino effect. His other creditors will panic. Precisely, Sophia confirmed. The entire house of cards is balanced on our foundation, and we are about to begin a seismic evaluation. Genevieve turned to Amelia. The question, my dear, is how you wish to proceed. We can bankrupt him by morning. We can acquire his company for pennies on the dollar and fold his legacy into our real estate portfolio. Or we can pursue a more delicate approach. The old Amelia, the one who had cried on the lumpy sofa just days ago, might have shrunk from this. But the woman sitting here now was an Ethelgard. The pain was still there, a raw wound in her heart, but it was now fueling a cold, clear purpose. She thought of her unborn child in the cavalier way Damien had dismissed their very existence. He built his identity on being a self-made man, Amelia said slowly, her voice steady. He needs to believe he is the master of his own destiny. Let's not take his company. Let's not take his money, not yet. Let's take his narrative. Genevieve raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, intrigued. We don't just pull the funding, Amelia explained, her confidence growing. We start asking questions. Quietly at first. We leak concerns to financial reporters. We initiate audits into his supply chains, his labor practices, his environmental compliance, all through our network of subsidiaries that he doesn't know are connected to us. We create 1,000 tiny cuts. Let him scramble. Let him exhaust himself fighting shadows. Let him watch his world unravel, thread by thread, and have no one to blame but his own supposed incompetence. A rare, thin smile touched Genevieve Ethelgard's lips. Sophia, the lawyer, looked impressed. You want to deconstruct him piece by piece, Genevieve mused. Psychologically, it's far crueler than bankruptcy. I approve. When he's at his lowest point, Amelia continued, a cold fire in her eyes. When his new life has abandoned him and he is truly alone, facing the wreckage of the empire he thought he built, that's when we'll let him know who we are. That's when he'll learn that his entire life was a generous settlement from a woman he was never smart enough to understand. The first sign of trouble, after the Argentum capital freeze, was a story on page 6 of a niche financial journal. The headline was innocuous. Voss Developments faces supply chain scrutiny. It was a small piece, citing anonymous sources who raised concerns about the ethical sourcing of steel for the Blackwood Tower project. Damien saw it and dismissed it as a hit piece planted by a competitor. He put his PR team on it and didn't give it a second thought. But then a week later, a more prominent online publication ran a story about potential union disputes at one of his construction sites in Chicago. Then an environmental blogger wrote a long, detailed post questioning the zoning permits for a luxury condo development in Miami, suggesting political favors had been involved. Individually, they were minor annoyances, gnats buzzing around his head, but collectively, they started to form a cloud. The narrative was shifting. Damien Voss, the Midas Touch developer, was now Damien Voss, the embattled tycoon. The whispers started at cocktail parties and in exclusive restaurants, the same ones where he and Isabella now struggled to get a prime table. What is going on, Dee? Isabella asked one evening, her voice sharp with irritation. They were at a charity gala, and she'd overheard two rival models whispering about the Voss drama. My agent called. The perfume brand is thinking of pausing my campaign. They said they want to avoid any negative associations. It's nothing, Damien snapped, his tie feeling tight around his neck. It's a coordinated attack from my rivals. They're jealous of the Blackwood project. I'm handling it. But he wasn't handling it. Every fire he put out, two more seemed to ignite elsewhere. His legal team was working around the clock. His CFO, Mark, looked perpetually haunted, presenting Damien with reports of nervous investors and banks requesting more frequent status updates. The effortless momentum that had defined his career had vanished. Now every step was a struggle, like walking through deep mud. He became obsessed, paranoid. He spent his nights hunched over his laptop, not designing his legacy, but scouring the internet for his own name, bracing for the next attack. He yelled at assistants for minor mistakes. His famous charm curdled into a brittle, aggressive defensiveness. Isabella, who had been drawn to the sun of his success, found herself shivering in its eclipse. The exciting, powerful man she'd attached herself to was being replaced by a stressed, angry stranger. The lavish gifts continued, but they felt desperate now, like bribes to get her to stay. Their conversations, once filled with exciting plans, were now dominated by his bitter tirades against his invisible enemies. "This isn't what I signed up for," she told him one night after he'd spent their entire dinner ranting about a building inspector in Florida. "I need to protect my brand, Damien." The word brand struck him. He had thought of her as a partner, but she saw him as a co-branding opportunity, and the brand was becoming toxic. The realization left him feeling hollow and profoundly alone. In Geneva, Amelia watched the fallout from a cool, detached distance. She was in the second trimester of her pregnancy, and the gentle swell of her belly was a constant comforting reminder of her purpose. She wasn't consumed by revenge. She was building a new life. She spent her days in Ethelgard's innovation labs, working with engineers on a philanthropic project, a new open-source platform designed to provide secure communication and logistical support for global aid organizations. Her mind, once dulled by the purposeless luxury of her life with Damien, was sharp and alive. She was in her element, solving complex problems, leading teams of brilliant people who respected her not for her name, but for her intellect. The timid, gentle woman Damien had cast aside was gone. In her place was Amelia Ethelgard, a leader, an innovator, and a future mother. Leo sat with her in her office, a minimalist space with a view of the mountains. "The financial press is starting to connect the dots," he said, pointing to a screen displaying a dozen different news articles. "They haven't figured out it's us, but they're seeing a pattern. They're calling it the Voss curse. His stock has dipped 12% in the last month." "Is he trying to contact me?" Amelia asked, her voice even. She hadn't heard a word from him since she'd walked out of the penthouse. "His lawyers have. They've sent 3 increasingly desperate-sounding letters about finalizing the divorce. They're trying to fast-track it, to sever all ties. I suspect he's trying to firewall his assets from what he still believes will be your claim to his fortune." Leo smirked. "The irony is delicious." "Let him," Amelia said. "Let him think that's the battle he's fighting." Her grandmother's strategy was brilliant. They weren't destroying his empire with a single, massive blow. They were dismantling it with 1,000 precise cuts, each one targeting a point of structural weakness Damien had overlooked in his arrogant ascent. They were using his own leverage against him, turning the complex web of shell companies, loans, and partnerships he'd built into a cage of his own making. One afternoon, Sophia, the head of legal, called Amelia into the main conference room. "It's time," she said, her expression grimly satisfied. "We've created enough instability. His secondary lenders are calling in their notes. He's facing a liquidity crisis. He's been trying to sell off smaller assets to raise cash, but the negative press has devalued them. He's trapped." Genevieve Ethelgard appeared on the holographic display. "He has a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning with his senior bankers, a last-ditch effort to secure a bridge loan. They are going to turn him down." "What happens then?" Amelia asked. "Then," her grandmother said, "he will be forced into a position where he has to sell a controlling interest in his parent company, Voss Holdings. There will only be one viable offer on the table, a private equity firm based in the Caymans, a firm called Sterling Legacy Partners." Amelia's breath hitched. Sterling, her mother's name. "The firm will acquire 51% of his company," Genevieve explained. "They will install a new board, and the new chairperson of that board will be you, should you choose to accept." The room was silent. This was it, the final move. It wasn't just about revealing her identity. It was about taking her seat at the head of his table, becoming the master of the universe he thought he commanded. "He will be there," Amelia realized, "at the meeting where they announced the takeover." "He will," Genevieve confirmed. "It's in his contract. The CEO must be present to welcome the new ownership." Amelia stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the serene snow-capped peaks. She rested a hand on her pregnant belly. Her child was kicking. For months, she had been a ghost, a shadow pulling strings from behind a curtain of immense power. Tomorrow she would step into the light, and Damien Voss would finally see the woman he had so foolishly thrown away. The boardroom at Voss Holdings was a theater of despair. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and failure. Damien Voss stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a ghost in one of his own bespoke suits. His face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. His remaining senior executives, including a shell-shocked Mark, sat like statues, avoiding his gaze. They had just been informed that their last line of credit had been denied. Insolvency wasn't a risk, it was a matter of days. So that's it? Damien's voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. No one else? No other offers? Mark cleared his throat. There is one. An offer came in overnight. It's, aggressive. He slid a folder across the table. A firm called Sterling Legacy Partners. They're offering to buy a 51% controlling stake, enough to cover our debts and stabilize the company. It's the only thing that saves us from total collapse. Damien stared at the name. Sterling Legacy Partners. It felt like a cruel joke, a ghost from a past life. He thought of Amelia Sterling, the quiet, simple woman he had discarded. Was this some bizarre coincidence? His mind, already frayed with paranoia, couldn't make sense of it. Who are they? He demanded. I've never heard of them. They're new, but their capital is anything but, Mark said, reading from a memo. Extremely private, based offshore. They're sending a representative to formalize the offer and meet the board. In fact, she should be here any minute. Damien felt a surge of humiliation. He was being forced to stand here and welcome the new vultures who would pick over the bones of his life's work. He, who had always been the acquirer, was being acquired. He straightened his tie, pulling together the last shreds of his pride. He would face this with dignity. He would show them he was still Damien Voss. The double doors of the boardroom opened, and Amelia walked in. The silence was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked from the room. She was not the gentle, unassuming woman he remembered. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue dress that elegantly accommodated her now very visible pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back in a sophisticated chignon. Her expression was calm, confident, and utterly unreadable. She moved with an authority that seemed to command the very space around her. Beside her was her brother Leo, and behind them, a team of lawyers whose suits probably cost more than a mid-sized car. Damien stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the world had tilted on its axis. Amelia, he breathed, the name a strange sound on his lips. What are you doing here? She didn't look at him. She addressed the room, her voice clear and steady, with a crisp transatlantic accent he'd never heard her use before. Good morning, gentlemen. I am here on behalf of Sterling Legacy Partners. She placed a slim briefcase on the table and opened it. I believe you have our offer. We are prepared to sign today. Our terms, however, are non-negotiable. Mark, the CFO, found his voice first. Mrs. Voss, I don't understand. You're with them? My name, she corrected him coolly, finally letting her eyes fall on Damien, is Amelia Ethelgard. Amelia Sterling Ethelgard. Sterling was my mother's name. I use it for certain personal ventures. The name Ethelgard landed in the room like a bomb. Every person at that table, titans of finance and industry, knew that name. Ethelgard Technologies was a legend, a mythical beast of the corporate world, a private, multi-trillion-dollar empire that shaped global markets from the shadows. To be an Ethelgard was to be royalty in a way that mere billionaires like Damien could only dream of. Damien felt his legs threaten to give way. The blood roared in his ears. The supply chain issues, the union disputes, the permit challenges, the flight of his investors. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't his rivals. It was her. It had been her all along. Argentum Capital, he whispered, the pieces clicking together with horrifying speed. The European Consortium is one of my family's oldest investment arms, Leo supplied helpfully from beside his sister, a grim smile on his face. They provided the seed money for your first tower, by the way. A small gift from my grandmother to celebrate your marriage to her only granddaughter. Damien stumbled back, gripping the edge of the table for support. His entire life, his self-made identity, the very foundation of his success, was a lie. He had been a charity case, a pet project for a powerful family he hadn't even known existed. He had stood on what he thought was a mountain of his own making, only to discover it was a volcano. And the woman he had cast aside held the detonator. The new board will be installed effective immediately, Amelia continued, her gaze unwavering, holding his. It was devoid of hatred, which was somehow worse. It was filled with a chilling, detached pity. I will be assuming the role of chairperson. Mr. Voss will be kept on as CEO for now. He will report directly to me. The humiliation was a physical agony. He would be a puppet in his own company, forced to answer to the woman he had callously dismissed. He would have to sit in meetings and follow her directives while she carried the child he had called a clause in a contract. His world hadn't just crumbled. It had been revealed as a fiction he had told himself. He looked at Amelia, really looked at her for the first time. He saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the steel in her posture, the effortless power she wielded. This was who she was all along, hidden in plain sight. He had been so blinded by his own reflection that he had failed to see the sun. "Why?" he choked out, the only word he could manage. Amelia's expression softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of the woman he had once known. "You told me I deserved a quiet life, a garden and books," she said, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "You were half right. I do deserve those things. But I also deserve this. You tried to take my future, Damien. So I'm taking back the past you built with my family's money. Consider it the first installment of our child's inheritance." The fallout was swift and absolute. The news of the takeover and of Amelia's true identity ripped through the financial world. It wasn't just a business story, it was a saga of Shakespearean proportions. The narrative Damien had so carefully crafted, that of the self-made visionary, was shattered and replaced by a more humiliating one. The clueless husband who had been propped up and then surgically dismantled by his wife's powerful family. His phone, which had once been a constant stream of offers and invitations, fell silent. His friends in the industry, men he had golfed with and made deals with, now crossed the street to avoid him. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and at country clubs. The first casualty of his new reality was Isabella. She had watched the news on a giant television in their borrowed New York apartment, her perfectly made-up face a mask of disbelief. Ethelgard, she had repeated, the name foreign and unbelievable on her lips. As in, the Ethelgards. You were married to an Ethelgard and you didn't know. The accusation in her voice was clear. He was not just a failure, he was a fool. And there was nothing less attractive to Isabella than a fool. "I'm leaving, Damien," she said that evening, her suitcases already packed and waiting by the door. There were no tears, no dramatic farewell. It was a business decision. "My brand can't sustain this kind of messiness. I need to distance myself." He didn't have the energy to argue. He just watched her go, the click of the door echoing the sound of Amelia's departure months earlier. But while Amelia's leaving had felt like a rupture, Isabella's felt like a simple erasure. It was as if she had never been there at all. He was left alone in the vast, empty apartment, surrounded by the trappings of a life that no longer felt real. Work became a daily exercise in humiliation. He was still CEO, a title that now felt like a cruel joke. He sat in his glass-walled office, the king of a kingdom that was no longer his. He was required to attend board meetings chaired by Amelia. She was professional, coolly efficient, never once using their shared history against him in front of others. But her very presence was a constant reminder of his failure. She would dissect his proposals with a sharp, logical mind he had never known she possessed. She would question his financial models, pointing out flaws with a calm precision that left him stammering. He saw now that her previous silence in their marriage hadn't been a lack of understanding, but a lack of interest in his petty corporate dramas. Her world operated on a different level entirely. He tried to reach out to her once, waiting for her after a grueling board meeting. "Amelia, can we talk?" She paused, her hand on the door, her belly a prominent, perfect sphere under her dress. "About what, Mr. Voss?" "If it's about the Q3 projections, please schedule a meeting with my assistant." "No, not about that," he said, his voice desperate. "About us." A look of genuine weariness crossed her face. "There is no us, Damien. There is you, there is me, and there is the business arrangement that we are both now a part of. That's all." "I'm sorry," he blurted out. The words felt inadequate, hollow. "I was a fool. I didn't see you. I didn't know." "No, you didn't," she said, her voice soft but unforgiving. "You didn't know because you never asked. You saw what you wanted to see. A beautiful, simple accessory to your life. The fault for that is yours alone." She turned to leave. "My grandmother used to say, never mistake quiet for weakness. It's a lesson you have learned the hard way." He was left alone in the empty boardroom, her words hanging in the air. The silence was his new companion. In the past, his life had been a cacophony of deals, calls, and praise. Now, in the crushing silence, he was forced to confront the one person he had been running from his entire life, himself. Without the external validation of success and adoration, he was forced to look inward, and he didn't like what he saw. He saw a deeply insecure man, terrified of being seen as small. His entire life had been a frantic effort to build walls of money and power around that fragile core. He had needed a wife who made him feel bigger, not one who was, in reality, galaxies larger than he was. He had needed the superficial worship of a woman like Isabella because he had no real self-worth of his own. He sold the San Francisco penthouse, a place he could no longer bear to enter. He moved out of the New York apartment and into a smaller, anonymous corporate rental. He stopped going to the clubs and restaurants. He began to strip away the layers of the persona he had built, and what was left was a man he didn't recognize. Lost, adrift, and utterly alone. One evening, he found himself walking past a playground. He saw a father pushing his daughter on a swing, her laughter echoing in the evening air. The image struck him with a force that buckled his knees. He was going to be a father. He had a child coming into the world, a child who would bear his blood but would be raised in the Ethelgard world of power and privilege. What would that child think of him? Would they know him only as the man who had been defeated by their mother? The man who had called their existence a clause in a contract? That was the moment the last of his pride finally broke. It wasn't about the money or the company anymore. It was about the future, about a legacy far more important than a tower of steel and glass. It was about the chance, however slim, to be a father. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that this was a redemption he could not buy. It would have to be earned. The 9 months of Amelia's pregnancy passed in a blur of code, contracts, and quiet contemplation. While the world watched the dramatic corporate restructuring of Voss Holdings under its new Ethelgard leadership, Amelia was focused on two creations, her child and a foundation she was building in her mother's name. The Sterling Foundation was her true passion project. Its mission was twofold: to invest in education for underprivileged girls in STEM fields, and to fund the development of technologies for humanitarian aid, the very platform she had begun designing in the days after she left Damien. She poured her energy into it, working with a small, dedicated team handpicked from the best and brightest within the Ethelgard ecosystem. This was her counter-narrative. The world might see her as the wronged wife who had enacted a spectacular revenge, but she was redefining herself on her own terms. She was not a victim, nor was she a vengeful queen. She was a creator, a builder. Damien had been obsessed with building a legacy of concrete and steel, monuments to his own ego. Amelia was building a legacy of knowledge, opportunity, and hope. Her office at the foundation was nothing like the cold, minimalist spaces Damien favored. It was warm and inviting, with comfortable chairs, shelves overflowing with books, and walls covered in whiteboards filled with complex diagrams and brainstorming notes. Here she was not chairperson Ethelgard or the infamous ex-Mrs. Voss. She was just Amelia, the leader of a team driven by a shared purpose. Her daughter was born in a private clinic in Geneva on a crisp autumn morning. She was a beautiful, healthy baby with a tuft of dark hair and her mother's calm, intelligent eyes. Amelia named her Clara after Marie Curie, a woman she had long admired. Holding Clara in her arms for the first time, the last vestiges of her pain over Damien's betrayal finally melted away. They were replaced by a fierce, protective love that reoriented her entire world. The corporate battles, the public drama, it all seemed insignificant compared to the tiny, perfect human sleeping in her arms. This was her true north. This was everything. Genevieve and Leo were her rocks, a constant source of support. Her grandmother, often seen by the world as a formidable ice queen, was a doting, tender great-grandmother to Clara, singing her old French lullabies. The Ethelgard mansion, once a place of quiet, formal solitude, was now filled with the soft sounds of a baby's coos and laughter. Amelia made a decision. She formally stepped down as chairperson of Voss Holdings, promoting a trusted Ethelgard executive to take her place. She would retain her seat on the board and her controlling interest, but her day-to-day focus would be on the Sterling Foundation and her daughter. She had proven her point. She had taken back control. Now it was time to build, not to rule. She heard snippets about Damien through business channels. He was still CEO of the company that bore his name, but he was a changed man. The reports described him as subdued, diligent, and focused. He had stopped fighting her directives and had started executing them with a quiet competence. He had successfully stabilized the company, not through brilliant, risky plays, but through careful, methodical work. He had, it seemed, finally learned humility. He made no attempt to contact her or the baby, which she was both grateful for and, in a strange way, troubled by. She had expected a legal fight, a demand for visitation. Instead, there was only silence. It was as if he was waiting for a signal, respecting a boundary she had not explicitly drawn, but had been made clear by her actions. When Clara was 6 months old, Amelia was reviewing a quarterly report from Voss Holdings. Tucked into the financials was a note about a new corporate philanthropy initiative. The company had made a multi-million-dollar anonymous donation to a fund supporting educational programs for disadvantaged youth in New York City. It was a small gesture for a company of its size, but it was significant. It was the kind of thing the old Damien would have scoffed at as a waste of capital. Intrigued, Amelia had one of her assistants do some digging. She discovered that Damien had been personally volunteering at a youth center in the Bronx on weekends. He wasn't there as Damien Voss, the famous CEO. He was just a guy named Damien, tutoring teenagers in math and business skills. He sought no publicity for it. No one knew but the kids he was helping. The discovery unsettled her. It was the first sign that his transformation might be more than just a survival tactic. It suggested a genuine internal shift. The man who had been obsessed with his own reflection was now spending his time helping others, with no audience to applaud him. A few weeks later, a package arrived for her at the foundation. It was a simple, hand-delivered manila envelope with no return address. Inside, there was no letter, only a single, legally binding document. Damien Voss was formally relinquishing all parental rights to Clara Ethelgard. He was voluntarily terminating his claim, asking for nothing, and legally removing himself from her life forever. Tucked alongside it was a handwritten note, the first she'd seen from him in almost a year. The note was only 2 sentences long. "She deserves better than a man like me as her father. My only wish is for her happiness." Amelia stared at the note, her heart aching, with a complex mix of emotions. It was the most selfless thing he had ever done. In giving up his rights, he was giving Clara a gift, a life free from the drama and pain of their past. He was removing himself as a potential source of conflict. For the first time, he had put his child's needs before his own ego. It was an act of penance, and perhaps, she realized with a startling clarity, it was also an act of love. A broken, painful kind of love, but love nonetheless. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the number for her legal team. She could file the papers, accept his surrender, and close this chapter forever. Clara would never have to know the flawed man who was her biological father. But as she looked across the room at the playpen where her daughter was happily babbling, she hesitated. Did she have the right to make that choice for her? To erase a part of her daughter's story, however painful? She thought about the man tutoring kids in the Bronx, the man who had walked away from his own child because he believed she deserved better. Her own legacy was about building, not erasing. It was about creating opportunities, not closing doors. With a deep breath, she put the phone down. She slid the legal document and Damien's note back into the envelope. This was not a decision to be made today, perhaps not for a long time. But she knew one thing for certain. The story of Damien Voss and his daughter was not over. It had simply reached a new and far more complicated beginning. A year later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Amelia sat on a park bench watching her daughter, Clara, take wobbly first steps on the grass. A man approached, hesitant and plainly dressed. It was Damien. He looked older, his face carrying the weight of his past, but his eyes were clear for the first time. He didn't ask for forgiveness or money. He simply asked if he could say hello to his daughter, just once. Amelia, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes, gave a single nod. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a quiet human beginning built on the ashes of a fallen empire and the humble hope for redemption, one tentative step at a time. What a journey of betrayal, empowerment, and the quiet, difficult path to redemption. This story shows that sometimes the greatest power isn't in destroying your enemies, but in rebuilding yourself. Do you think Amelia made the right choice in the end? Should Damien be allowed a place in his daughter's life, even from a distance? Let us know what you think in the comments below. We read every single one. If you were moved by Amelia's story and her incredible strength, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic revenge and resilience. And make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next emotional deep dive. Thank you for watching.